The StG44 and AVS-36 are expensive and difficult to unlock. These late-game rifles are very popular amongst the community, but hopefully in this video you'll see why I consider that a mistake. Fair warning, I know there are a lot of people in the community with a strong emotional attachment to these guns. That's okay, you're allowed to like them. You're allowed to use them. I myself personally like quite a few guns despite them not being particularly strong in the meta, for example the MG34 and C96. But just because you like them doesn't make them good, and in this video I'm making the case that the StG44 and AVS-36 are perhaps the most overrated guns in the game, and perform very poorly in most combat scenarios compared to better alternatives. They are late game items, but you wouldn't know it from their stats. I have several issues with these weapons that make them a poor choice for general use, but two particular attributes shine out above all the others. Two very important statistics, arguably the most important statistics a gun can have, which, when they're both as bad as this, make a gun both terrible at close range, terrible at long range, and terrible everywhere in between. The first, and in my experience the most poorly understood, is accuracy. A lot of players are in denial of this material fact. The AVS-36 and StG44 are not very accurate weapons. They're slightly better than a typical submachine gun, and they're nowhere near accurate enough to snipe with. At around 50 meters range, both weapons already have a big enough spread that they won't hit a headshot even if you, the shooter, aim perfectly. And by 100 meters, the accuracy is so appalling that the spread is bigger than a man, even with the most accurate builds. You are practically rolling dice whether you hit your shot or not, even at fairly short range with these weapons. Your aim is irrelevant. It's just getting lucky if you hit your shots. As a result, both weapons are functionally limited to short range, 70 meters or less, unless your opponent is for some reason unable to shoot back or reach cover, in which case you can happily spray the shockingly inaccurate rifles until you get lucky and hit them. I strongly advise absolutely no one to ever even remotely consider equipping a scope for these guns. If you're shooting at a range where you need a scope, it doesn't even matter if you're aiming at the target or not. Point in that general direction and cross your fingers, because that scope is utterly useless. Save your repair costs and improve your field of view by unequipping it. Slightly mitigate the terrible accuracy by equipping field sights, or, better yet, save even more money by never buying these rifles to begin with. The second big factor that kills these guns' viability is time to kill, or TTK. The time between when you start shooting at your opponent and them lying dead on the floor is an extremely important weapon stat for all short-range battles, since if you and an enemy player start shooting each other simultaneously, the player with the faster TTK will win. Time to kill is derived from the damage per second of a weapon, which in turn is derived from the damage and rate of fire of a weapon. But it's more complicated than that, because at a certain point, a tiny increase in damage can mean the difference between instantly killing an enemy and them surviving on a sliver of health and killing you before you can fire your next shot. The matter is complicated further by the heavyset badge, which many players equip to reduce the damage they take. Because of the exact amount of damage both of these weapons deal, they are by default a 3-hit kill to most enemies, but they're a 4-hit kill versus heavyset enemies. The AVS can remedy this somewhat by equipping high damage ammo that will drive both your repair costs and recoil through the roof, but the StG44 is stuck as a 4-hit kill, even with custom ammo. Both weapons have a rather unexceptional rate of fire. The StG44 scales from 500 to 600 RPM, while the AVS scales from 545 to 631, depending on the mods. That gives even the most powerful build of the StG44 a time to kill of 208 milliseconds versus non-heavyset, and a glacially slow 311 milliseconds against heavyset. For reference, a semi-auto starter rifle such as the SVT40 has a time to kill of just 171 milliseconds that functions against all levels of heavyset. And a decent LMG such as the Maxim Tokarev has a time to kill of 173 milliseconds. The MG42, the most powerful close-quarters infantry weapon, has a time to kill of just 120 milliseconds versus non-heavy set enemies. And it can get down to 104 milliseconds even versus heavy set, with the highest damage build. Although, at that point, the recoil is a bit much. Speaking of which, the AVS clocks in at a minimum time to kill of 190, which isn't too far behind the damage of weapons which are actually good. But, when built in this way, the recoil is among the worst in the game. The gun is totally uncontrollable, not only climbing as the MG42 does, but kicking wildly from side to side, making it much worse even for skilled players who can counteract the heavy vertical recoil of the MG42, functionally ruining your otherwise acceptable time to kill. Other weapons, such as the Garand or 1919, can achieve a better time to kill, while also being far more controllable. But it gets worse. The AVS is famous for having a small magazine as far as automatic weapons go, but due to the low damage, poor accuracy, and heavy recoil, you functionally get the same, if not far less damage dealt from each magazine, compared to an SVT-40, which also has a faster time to kill, and better accuracy than the AVS. And to top it off, those expensive and difficult to unlock AVS and Sturmgewehr, they weigh more than the standard semi-auto rifle equivalents. All of this compiles to making the AVS and the Sturmgewehr objectively bad weapons. The AVS's automatic fire is outweighed by its pathetic damage, giving it a time to kill worse than an SVT, while having the same effective magazine size when you factor in the damage per hit, and being heavier, less accurate, shorter ranged, and with far, far more recoil. It effectively makes the AVS significantly inferior to the SVT in every imaginable regard. And indeed, the only time the AVS is ever better is if your aim is so bad that you're missing every shot, and the terrible accuracy can allow you to occasionally land a hit by accident. Literally, the only way the AVS is ever better than the SVT is if you are missing your shots. The Sturmgewehr does at least get a small boost in mag capacity, but it's a 4-hit kill versus heavy set, as opposed to the reliable 2-hit kill of semi-autos. So it's actually left in the dust in terms of time to kill versus both heavy set and non-heavy set enemies. And the damage per shot functionally offsets the boost to magazine size, which is even worse when you factor in the awful accuracy, meaning you'll inevitably miss a fair chunk of your shots when shooting at 50 meters or longer range, and so your effective damage per magazine is very poor. Perhaps its one saving grace is its very low recoil when unmodded, letting it function as a slightly longer ranged submachine gun for those who can't aim well enough to use the semi-auto rifles effectively. Because if you can aim, you're just better off with a semi-auto. The Sturmgewehr is, in the truest sense, a crutch. It handicaps the player using it, as even with perfect aim they'll miss many shots, and even with perfect reactions they still take a long time to kill the enemy, making it very poorly suited for skilled players. But it accommodates for terrible players, as it has a chance to hit even when the shooter misses their mark. Like I said, you're practically rolling dice at medium range or longer. Now, if you really hate having to aim and click fast and fight recoil, but you also want a little bit more range than the far more powerful SMGs, this gun might work for you. But to unlock it, you have to reach Infantry Assault rank 12, and therefore have spent a decent amount of time playing infantry and using the very semi-automatic rifles that are so much better than it for general use if you have any semblance of good aim. So you see, the facts just shows that however prestigious and difficult to obtain they are, the AVS-36 and Sturmgewehr are not worth your time or money. The AVS is a cumbersome, heavy, slow and inaccurate straight downgrade to the SVT-40, which by contrast is objectively speaking one of the best weapons in Heroes and Generals, while the Sturmgewehr is a crutch that is inaccessible to new players, and handicaps experienced players who would be better off using something more powerful that can take advantage of their superior skill.